Okay, good morning. My name is Karen A, and this is the Afro-Euro Reco12 podcast. We are a family of recovery resources for addicts suffering from all addictions and all afflictions. If you are an alcoholic, you're a Narcotics Anonymous, an overeater, a gambler, a debtor, a workaholic, an anorexic, a bulimic, and feel free to add anything else to the list. We hope you found your home here. You can check us out on all our recordings at Reco12.com. We've got a bunch of recorded podcasts. We've got Noodle It Out with Nikki, where Nikki dives deep into the big book with Justin B., founder and host of our flagship meeting. We're here this morning today. With James F., who's going to talk to us about freedom from bondage. James is going to tell his story, and we're going to hear his experience, strength, and hope. If you would like to contribute a seventh tradition, you could go to Reco12.com/support. Without further ado, here's James. Thanks, James. Welcome.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share my story. I hope that it helps somebody come into recovery and take everything that's on offer, like I did, which has given me the freedom that I wanted, that I needed in order to get well. So, the topic's freedom from bondage. So I'm going to talk about numerous things. What does that mean? And what is it that keeps me in bondage of self? What I had to do in order to get free from that, and what I continue to have to do on a daily basis throughout the day, quite often, and what the promises are as a result of what I've been taught in the steps and the 12 steps in order to get free from self. So, just a little bit about my background and what brought me to my knees, should I say, because it literally did bring me to my knees, this disease. I got sober on the 1st of January 2020, so I'm nearly 5 years and 10 months free from substances, and it was 2019 when I hit my rock bottom. And I was desperate, and I was in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. I was in bondage of self, but I didn't know that term. I've learned that term, and there's a chapter on it in the big book of AA, which I'm going to read a little paragraph of a little bit later. But I was in bondage of self. I was in self-pity, all about self, all about me. And the suffering was that immense that, I was drinking, but even that wasn't giving me the freedom anymore. In the end, I was just doing it because of my addiction, because that was all I knew how to do. I'm going to go back even further than that to my childhood, and keep it short, really. But a lot of these causes and conditions that it talks about in the big book of alcoholism and addiction, I can remember those feelings and those emotions and those thoughts from a very young age. So before I even found any sort of substances, alcohol, drugs, before I even knew what those were, I have now learned in my journey that I was suffering from untreated alcoholism and addiction as a child. So what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that actually the substances have got very little to do with the disease, certainly in terms of the causes and the conditions of the disease. It is important to talk about the substances, of course, because where we have differences is what we drank and what we used and how we drank and how we use, etc. But the commonality there is what those things did for me. I drank and I used effectively because I liked the effect that was produced. What effect did I want? Well, I wanted that feeling to go away. I wanted that mind to calm down. I wanted to just feel normal. I wanted to feel confident. I want my anxiety to go away, because I also have had a lot of and still have anxiety issues. So I drank because I just couldn't cope with all of those feelings, and I couldn't cope with life. And I didn't understand that at the time at a young age. Yes, I took my first drink when I was 14, and very quickly over the course of the next 2 years through to 16, I'd pretty much gone through every substance that I could get my hands on, because it it was the first time in my life that I didn't feel what I'd felt all my life to that point. And I loved feeling free of that pain and that suffering. Freedom from bondage, that's what it was. It worked. It was a solution that worked for me in the beginning. And I didn't really know the difference between what it did for me and what it was doing for my friends, because, of course, I was in a group of people that were doing the same things. But as I got older, it was really interesting, actually, as I look at it now. My friends got younger and younger and younger. Why? Well, that's because the people in my age group, they started to have responsibilities, work, families, and they stopped doing the things that we'd been doing. They weren't addicts. They weren't alcoholics. They were able to control or moderate their drinking. I wasn't, I just had to continue, and what I had was the obsession, which I'll talk about as well in detail, and the book has taught me. I had the obsession that they didn't have, and I also had that spiritual malady, that feeling inside of something missing within me, and I needed to fulfill that with something. Now, my journey in trying to solve the problem, and I laugh there because for many, many years I tried to solve the problem, but I didn't really understand the problem. But even if I had, I wouldn't have had the power in order to do that on my own. But I tried to do it in many things. It wasn't just substances. I was also a workaholic as well. For 8 years, solid, I worked in my head. So even if I wasn't at work, I was in my mind, I was working. It was an obsession. It was another obsession. And that itself made me very sick. So whatever it is I obsess about, it makes me sick. It makes me very sick. It makes me ill. And it's very powerful, and I can't stop it. Even if I want to, I can't stop it. So this continued for years and years and years. And then, that brings me back to where I really started talking about, which is my rock bottom year, because that freedom that the substances gave me didn't really give me that freedom anymore. I've tried material things, everything, success, money. I really like Bill's story on page one of the big book. It actually isn't even a full page of text, but I needed a sponsor to really bring that page to life for me. And there's so much in that page. When I first read the page, I thought, I'm nothing like Bill. When a sponsor took me through it and brought all of these things out that I hadn't seen myself, I thought, I'm exactly like Bill. I get a little emotional when I talk about it, because it takes me back to that time and reminds me who I am. And it also reminds me that I'm not alone in this. And when I was at my rock bottom in 2019, it was a very, very scary, lonely thought. That feeling of terminal uniqueness, which is another term I've learned in the fellowship and in my recovery. I thought I was the only person on the planet that felt like that. And if that was true, the reason I was very lonely was because that meant that I'm the only person that feels like it, meaning I cannot get help. There is nothing in there that can solve my problem. And I tried to find that solution, as I talked about, and I'd run out of ideas. I couldn't think of anything else to try. I wasn't aware of the 12-step program at that point. But I was in a suicidal place at that point, at my rock bottom, because the pain was that bad, and nothing was taking that pain away, that I started to consider taking my own life, because I couldn't live like that. My life was very unmanageable. My wife also left me at this time, which I resented her for hugely. I had a massive resentment over that. I don't anymore, because I now understand what it was like to live with me as a person, and she had to leave me for her own well-being, because this illness doesn't just make the person sick. All the people who are close to that person also become sick. And in fact, the closer you are to the person with the addiction or alcoholism, the more you're going to get hurt by that person. And it's sad. It's very sad. But she had to make that decision, which I now understand was a very difficult decision for her. But she had to do it. And actually, in a way, I now see that as something that had to happen to help me too, because that's what brought me to my knees at that point, and I had to get to that position in order to begin my surrender on this journey. So I'm now just going to read from The Bondage of Self, which is on page 544 of the big book. I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs there. Every time I read this, I feel emotions. And when I first read it, I cried, because it really explains for me in I won't say in detail, but it explains very specifically how I felt, especially when I was young as a child. So here it goes. The mental twists that led up to my drinking began many years before I ever took a drink. For I am one of those whose history proves conclusively that my drinking was a symptom of a deeper trouble. Through my efforts to get down to causes and conditions, I stand convinced that my emotional illness has been present from my earliest recollection.
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Reco12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
I never did react normally to any emotional situation. The medical profession would probably tell me I was conditioned for alcoholism by the things that happened to me in my childhood. And I'm sure they would be right as far as they go, but AA has taught me I am the result of the way I reacted to what happened to me as a child. What is much more important to me, AA has taught me that through this simple program, I may experience a change in this reaction pattern that will indeed allow me to match calamity with serenity. So there's lots of things I'm going to talk about throughout my share and in what I've just read there. But what I'm just going to talk about now is a sentence where it says, I never did react normally to any emotional situation. So what I've learned about the problem of alcoholism is that it's not really the alcohol, it's not the drugs, it's not all of those things. What it is the causes and conditions that it mentioned there. And whilst I may have an abnormal reaction to substances and to alcohol, and it is important to talk about that, but more importantly, I have an abnormal reaction to life. And I loved that sentence because it taught me so much. It should have been quite obvious to me, but it wasn't, that I've got a problem where I do not react normally like other people do. So when I look at other people and how they're coping and what their lives like, and I want what they have, etc., etc., I see them drinking normally. They are normal in many ways. Of course, normal is an interesting word because, there is no real normal. But what I'm talking about is people who aren't alcoholics and people who aren't addicts. They do not react to life in the way that I react to life. What's the difference? Well, everybody has feelings of emotions, of anger and resentment. But how I react is just extreme, So we all as humans have those same feelings, but as an addict, as an alcoholic, they're just out of proportion. They are, I make a mountain out of a molehill, as the saying goes. Even little things, it talks in there about in that reading about trauma. Yes, I did have some trauma. Yes, I did have parents that didn't parent me well, for which I've forgiven them since. But I didn't react to little things. You know, there'd be little things like I didn't get invited to a birthday party at school, and I wasn't the only person in the class who didn't get invited. However, I was the only person that didn't get invited that reacted the way that I did inside. It bothered me that much that whilst I don't have many memories of a child, I do remember things that that generated emotions within me, and I can remember that moment and how I felt at that time, because that emotion was so strong within me, that I can remember it. And why was that the case? Well, I've learned that that's because I had this feeling of not being good enough, not fitting in, not being liked, all fear-based stuff, which I carried into adulthood. And because of that, you know, it's like not being invited to a birthday party. Well, I needed to be invited to the birthday party in order to be okay. As an adult, I needed to have friends around me. I needed to be liked. I needed to be successful in work. I needed to have relationships. I needed to be loved. These are all needs that I believed and felt that were crucial for my happiness and my peace. Now, what the program has taught me is that if my happiness and my peace is contingent on people, places, and things, then I'm never ever going to be happy. I'm never ever going to be at peace. And as a result of that, and trying to chase that throughout my life, and not getting that in my life. And when I say not getting it, yes, I may have got some of those things, but then lost them. I may have got some of those things and kept them, but they didn't actually give me the feeling and satisfaction that I thought that it would give me. As a result, oh, I've got this, great, I've got it. I've had an exciting moment that I've achieved something, or I've got this relationship, or something's gone the way I wanted it to go. And that feeling would be fleeting. It would be gone. And the next day I've still got that emptiness. And now I think I've got to have something else in order to fill that void. No wonder that I used drink and drugs. I used drink and drugs because that was just so painful for me, that I just needed that pain to go away. Why? Why is it that people are not doing what I want them to do? Why is it that things don't go my way? It's all about self-will, and it also has taught me in this program about how selfish and self-centered that way of being is, because that's playing God. You know, no one has everything going the way that they want it to go in life. It's a fantasy, and from a very young age, again, you know, and I can still do it now, my mind can start going into a fantasy about how something should be, and if it was like this, then life would be wonderful. And it's not real. It's not real. And it drove me to destruction in 2019. It drove me to the point of nearly losing everything. I lost my wife. I could have ended up losing my job. I was very lucky that I didn't. But what happened to me at that point was I got down on my knees and I prayed. So at this point, I'm in bondage of self and I'm praying. And what I didn't realize, and I now understand, is when I got on my knees, because it literally did bring me to my knees, this disease, that was the beginning of surrender. Now, I had no belief in any God of any sort or higher power. However, at that point, in desperation, I got on my knees and I prayed and I begged for help. I now see that as a moment, I now see that as the beginning of my recovery journey. I did drink and use a couple of times since then because I hadn't found all the wonderful people in AA to help me at that point. But I was determined to beat the game again. And even though I now know that I wasn't able to do that on my own, what I had stopped thinking about was taking that ultimate decision and suicide. So my suicidal thoughts stopped at that point. I also had a God instant moment where a few days later, after I prayed, I was with my son, who was only 4 years old at the time. And I say I was with him, I wasn't present because my mind was somewhere else. So physically I was there, but mentally I wasn't. And he stopped what he was doing and walked up to me and put his arm around me and said, "I don't want you to ever die, Daddy." And walked away and carried on doing what he was doing. And that floored me. You know, that was like, wow, At that point, I'm thinking about suicide, and my son has just told me he never wants me to die. That gave me some power for two reasons. One, because it brought me into the present moment.
Hey Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss Reco12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to Reco12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform.
And it gave me a realization of things that I have got in my life to be grateful for, because at that point, and throughout all my life, I've not been grateful for anything. I've not felt a reason to be around. I've not felt a purpose in life. So it gave me a feeling of purpose. What it also did is I thought it was a bit coincidental, but something inside me was believing, because the timing was perfect. And that gave me some faith. It gave me some faith that I didn't have, in that maybe there is something out there that's watching over me. So it opened my mind a little bit. I then came into AA on the 5th of January 2020. I was 4 days clean and sober, broken. And I went to my first AA meeting in Spain, and in fact, on the way to the meeting, there was a bloke in the car who told me he used to drink 2 bottles of whiskey a day. I didn't do that, so I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I then went into the meeting, and people didn't talk about how much they drank, or whether they did or didn't take drugs. They talked about the stuff that I've been talking about. Now, you probably notice I haven't really mentioned much about alcohol and drugs. Yes, they are a big part of my story. But the reason that I don't focus on the war stories is because it was the causes and conditions that they spoke about in that first meeting that I went to that made me feel like I wasn't different anymore. And it also took away that lonely feeling of being terminally unique. It removed that from me, because it gave me hope. It gave me hope because there are other people, in fact, a room full of people that I'm sat in. There's probably about 20 people in this meeting. And everybody who shared something that I related to. I related to that feeling. I related to the bondage of self that they talked about. And they had something. They had something that I'd always wanted and tried to get on my own, but couldn't quite get there. And that gave me hope. Okay, so if I've got a room full of people who are like me, or I'm like them, I'm not as unique as I thought I was. And these people have got the thing that I'm looking for. Then plain and simply, I knew that there was a solution to this problem that I've been describing. I then got a sponsor quite quickly, and started going through the steps. And in step 1, really, it's the biggest step really, is understanding the problem. As I said earlier in my share, I didn't really understand the problem that I was trying to solve. I didn't know I was an alcoholic and addict. And I learned what alcoholism and addiction is. And actually, as I said, it's got very little to do with the substances. Where the substances is important is the way that it makes you feel, and also what it talks about in the big book about the craving that it gives you. There's an abnormal reaction that happens when I put a substance in my body that doesn't happen in the normal temperate drinker, in that I cannot stop, or I don't know when I'm going to stop. I don't know what's going to happen next. The blackouts, the not being able to account for hours, a big period of 6-7 hours of that evening or the early hours of the next morning, which it would be in many cases for me, of where I've been, what I've done, who I've been with, how I got to where I was when I woke up. So I learned about that in step one. But in terms of if I just have abstinence, is that the solution? Well, no. Well, I'd tried that many times on my own. I'd managed to stop. In fact, the delusion of the illness told me that I stopped once for 3 months, therefore I've got control. That's the delusion. What I learned was the problem is I cannot control when I'm going to start again. That could be the next day, it could be a week, it could be months, but at some point I will pick up if I don't have a solution and I'm on my own. I will never beat the game. So I learned about the powerlessness, and I learned that actually I'm powerless over so many things. I learned about I'm powerless over my reaction to life, which I talked about, which the reading that I gave on Freedom from Bondage talked about. I'm powerless over my reaction. I have these reactions inside me that come up, anger, resentment, whatever it is, and I act upon them accordingly. Now, today, I still have those reactions inside. The program has taught me to identify them when they're happening and pause and turn to the solution. And then what happens is I don't act upon them. I'm not perfect. Quite often I act upon them still, but I have that choice today. I have an awareness of what's going on within me, because I've learned about myself in step one and throughout all of the steps, about what's going on inside me and those emotions and what the triggers are. It talks about them in the book about emotional displacements. It talks about certain attitudes and feelings that precede that first drink. I'm able to see those today and be aware of them. And the program's given me a different way of dealing with those things when they occur within me. In step one, I also learned about the unmanageability, which is a big one on page 52. It talks about them in the 9 bedevilments, prey to misery and depression, having trouble with relationships. So just 2 of those. There's 9 in total, but all of those I totally related to, and did an exercise on where they were affecting me at that point in time. And it reveals so much, actually going through these steps isn't just about reading the book, it also isn't just about reading the book with a sponsor. There are exercises that are given, a lot of pen to paper stuff, and getting stuff down. And the illness, as I spoke about, and I spoke about the delusion, what the steps showed me is the truth. And it talks about a spiritual awakening in the book, which I've had. I also like to say I've awakened to the truth today. The truth that I'm the problem. The truth that in order to be free, I thought I needed people and situations to go my way, but actually, and I also actually thought that I needed to be free of all of the things that other people had done to me. And that's not true. And also, if that was the case, I would never be free, because there are so many, resentments that I had, so many situations I want to go my way. That's just not reality. That's not going to happen. So if my happiness is contingent on those things, then I'm never going to be happy. So when, the reason I've picked this topic today of freedom from bondage is because what I've learned and what I remind myself on a day-to-day basis is the only thing I've ever needed to be free from is myself, just myself. That's the only person I've ever needed to be free from. And that's actually good news, because that I can do something about. I can't do anything about other people and what they do or don't do, or what they say or what they don't say. There are a lot of sick people out in the world, alcoholic or not alcoholic, and people do things. People do bad things. But another thing that I learned as well, and this is the honesty of the program, is I also learned that other people have feelings. Wow, how selfish and self-centered is it of me to think that I'm the only person that has feelings on this planet? Other people have feelings too, and other people react in bad ways and good ways. Doesn't really matter. But I can't do anything about all of those things, but I can do something about me. So if the only person I really need to be free from is myself, then that's good news, because I can work on that. And the program and the 12 steps has shown me how to get free from bondage of self. So I then got into step 2, and step 2 gives you this ultimatum, really. Either go on to the bitter ends, jails, institution, death, and carry on drinking and using and suffering on your own, or find spiritual help. Now, a lot of people in this step think there's a third option, and sadly there are many who try and go back out there and find another way, but I didn't need any convincing. Why? Because, as I said, when I was at my rock bottom, I'd ran out of other ideas. I didn't have a third option. I tried everything that I could try. And I knew that what was being shown to me in this program in terms of spiritual hope was the only solution, that I had never tried. And I saw other people in the program had done this thing, and they had what I wanted, which was freedom from bondage, freedom from self. So I needed no convincing, but still I didn't really get logically the idea of a higher power. But what step 2 really very cleverly did, and I did it with willingness and open-mindedness and honesty, that I need to get these blockages out of the way. Or what are the blockages? The blockages are my thoughts, my prejudices, all of those things that are in my mind telling me that this thing can't be true or in my way. So therefore, plain and simply, I need to forget about what my head is telling me. And that made sense to me, because what I'd also learned at this point was that everything my head has told me to this point in my life, and I was 43 years old when I came into recovery, had got me to a place of destruction. It didn't work for me. So it was pretty evident to me that I could not rely on my way of thinking. So why rely on my way of thinking when I'm trying to say, how can there be this higher power, this thing? So I got that out of the way, and I just did everything that was suggested. And I started to have experiences, spiritual experiences. You know, I didn't have this big spiritual experience in one go. It was lots of little things. And that is at this point where I then look back to the story with my son when he came to me and said what he said. I then really believed that was something that was from some form of a higher power, because I'd had so many more of these incidents, God incidents, since that point, that it started to become pretty clear to me that if I keep doing all of these things and I keep my mind open and I keep being willing, life gets better and I start to feel better. So it doesn't matter whether my mind understands something or not, because I've had something much more powerful than that, because I've had an experience within inside my heart, within inside my soul, that I can't really, you can't explain that to somebody else. It's an experience that you've got to have for yourself. But having had that experience, that for me makes it more real than my mind trying to understand it with logic. And what I say to a lot of people at this point, because and I know I'm talking about it a lot because it's a very important step, and so many people don't get past this point. And what I say to people is actually the human brain does not have the capability to understand something like this. There is so much that science just does not understand about the world and the universe. So what I also realized at this point in step 2 is that I actually had no evidence to say there was or there wasn't, but I'd chosen one of them. I'd chosen that there wasn't without any evidence. Well, now just choose the other one. I can put this very, very simply, as it was very simply put to me, that I have a choice. Either way, which one I've ever chosen, I've never had the evidence or the understanding of it in my mind. I've just chose the one that's brought me to my knees. Well, now choose the one that gives you what all of these people have got, which is happiness and freedom. So that's what I did. And things kept getting better. In step 4, I then really got to pen to paper and started to see more of my truth. Why is it that I've got all of these resentments? What is the reaction inside me that it talked about in the chapter there that keeps me in bondage of self? Why have I got these reactions? And it goes really, really deep into the fears and took me really back to my childhood. Yes, there may have been some traumas there that caused some of those things, but they are not the reason that I am how I am, which is what I've also learned in step 4. And that also allowed me to forgive people, especially my parents, who were number 1 and number 2 on my list. I'm sure that's pretty common. I forgave them. And also learned that they were doing the best that they could with what they knew. So I learned so much about myself in step 4, and what's wonderful about step 4 is it then turns it around. Well, okay, you've got this resentment of this other person. Well, there's nothing we can do about them, so let's push them to one side and let's look at you. What was your part in it? Now, even if I don't, and the steps are very clever in this, is even if I don't think I had a part in it, there is probably somebody else that I've done this thing to, or worse. So who am I to judge them and resent them and hate them and think they're a bad person when I've done things similar to other people or worse? So I've got to keep looking at my side of the street. And what I found was that there was one common denominator in all of the resentments that I had on paper, and that was me. That was me. So it showed me in black and white on pen to paper where the problem was. The problem was not external to me. The problem is internal. Therefore, it was very obvious why no external solution would have ever fixed my problem. And I needed an internal solution, and I needed a power greater than myself in order to solve my problem. So that I've grown with lots throughout my journey and throughout the rest of the steps, which I just want to sum up and make sure you're being conscious of time here too. Through steps 4 to 12, it's just a continuous thing for me on a day-to-day basis. Is looking at myself all of the time, because I have a default position. I wake up every day in defects of character that it showed me in 6 and 7. I wake up in self. I wake up in bondage of self on a daily basis. I have to get free from that through action. So all of these things that I've talked about and I've learned about in my program is these are the things you need to do. Okay, I get that. Okay, but I need to do them. I need to get off my arse and do these things on a daily basis. And the first part of that is making my bed in the morning, doing my step 3 prayer, which is the prayer that I've chosen today, which also prays for freedom from bondage, meditate. Do readings throughout the day, pause throughout the day, pray throughout the day as and when required. And then there's the step 12, which is working with others. And I like what it says in the beginning of that chapter, where it says that it works where everything else fails, So if I've done my praying, if I've done my meditation, if I've read a few readings and I'm still feeling that feeling of self within me, then turning to somebody else and calling somebody, working with a sponsee, whatever it may be, just being useful and helping somebody else always works. It gets me out of me every single time. I like what I actually heard a YouTube listened to a YouTube audio once, and he talked about self-help books. So I read a lot of self-help books. The problem with self-help books is they're about how do I help me, which is very about self. When I do the opposite of that and look at how I can help another person, that's when I get free. And I don't do it for that reason. I do it because I want to. I do it because it gives me a purpose in life. But the byproduct of giving this away and helping another person frees me from the bondage of self. It just does it. It just does it. So yeah, I just want to wrap this up. I think I'm pretty close to my 30 minutes. say that to anyone in the meeting today or who's going to be listening to this audio when it's been published, is there is a solution to this problem. Yes, you will have resistance inside you when the work is presented to you and things are being asked of you, such as finding a higher power, such as getting honest with yourself. That's normal to have those resistance within inside you. This disease is powerful. It doesn't want you to get well. The black wolf that I talk about, the black wolf and the white wolf, the black wolf within you sees that it's under threat. Okay, and it's got all of these spiritual things and these people in AA. It's starting to feel like it's getting less power. It's going to fight back for that, and there's going to be resistance. But the only thing that is in my way is myself. The only thing that is in your way is yourself. You've got to step aside that self, that bondage of self, your ideas and your ways of doing things which clearly haven't worked for you, and find a new way of living. And this is the way, this is the solution. This shows you how to live free from bondage of self, free from your addictions, and give you what you've always been searching for and deserve, and that's peace and happiness in this life. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you for that powerful story of your recovery, of your journey through the 12 steps of having no gratitude, wanting to take your life, having no reason to live, or so you thought, getting a hug from your son who said he wanted you to never die, realizing that you've got so much to live for. I know I needed to hear that today about gratitude, about appreciation, realizing that you need to be free of all the resentments, that you need to work a program, and that you need to pray, and that you need to stay close to your higher power. And we thank you for sharing. We have a small group on the line, but hundreds of people listen weekly. I would like to invite people to post their questions in the chat or to unmute, and then James can take your question on his own story and on his recovery one by one. Okay, guys, anyone want to come in with a question? Okay, so I guess I'd love to hear about how you work with others. James, can you share about that?
About working with others?
Yep.
Hey, Reco12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Reco12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at reco12.com/support or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Reco12 Spearhead.
Yes, so yes, I've been fortunate to have a few people ask me to take them through the work on my journey. And it's a great feeling when somebody comes up to you and says that they like your story, they want what you have. Can you help them and can you take them through the work? I meet with people and talk about what's involved, because sadly there's quite a lot of people that they start the work but they don't continue with the work. So I'm very honest with people at the beginning about what's involved in taking them through the work. to make sure that it's really something that they're willing to do and they desperately want, as I did. And then we begin. I do a lot of stuff on video, but meet people when necessary. But I've had sponsees in different parts of the world, which is amazing. But this is, the experience that I get through doing it. Well, there's two things really. Is as I take them through the steps, and I'm reading with them, and I'm bringing the book to life, and I'm giving them the exercises. It's reminding me. It's reminding me of who I am, and it's also giving me a kick, really. And because I'll read things that I'm asking them to do certain things that the program is suggesting, and I'm realizing I'm not actually doing that myself. You got to practice what you preach, James. So it's really good for me to do that, because I have a mind that whilst I've been through the book several times and I know the book very well, I would say, there's so much in there that I forget. So I need to be reminded of those things, and that's great because I get to go over it again and again and again when I work with people, when I work with others, and seeing them grow. The most rewarding thing is seeing them grow, is seeing them from how they were when they first asked me to work with them, and then just sometimes just a couple of weeks, or maybe a couple of months of them having done the work, I start to see the light shining in them. And for that for me is another God moment. It's another awakening, because at the end of the day, I keep humble, and I believe that just thinking about this St. Francis's prayer, I'm an instrument. I'm doing service for God, and God is using me as somebody who can carry that message and help that person. Sometimes I'll say things and come out with things, and I see how much it's helped somebody, and I'm like, well, where did that even come from? I know that comes from God. Of course, I have my story and I have my way of explaining things and seeing things, but when there's God consciousness there, which there is when I'm working with others, I feel really useful. I feel like I've got a purpose, and I feel like God is using me to help his children. Okay, so I'm just looking at some of the questions in the chat. First one,
go ahead.
Yeah, so the first one there being what your 11th step nightly review looks like. This is an honest program. I'm slacking in that I'm not doing that at the moment. So I'm going to be very, very, very honest. Even step 10, I've actually just reached out to someone and asked for them to sponsor me, because and one of the things they asked me was where am I slacking in my program at the moment, and 10 and 11 was my answer to that. But it's really important, and I'm glad actually I've been asked the question, because like I said before, it's why I like working with others, because it just reminds me of where I'm weak at the moment. And we're humans, we're not perfect. I can't do all 12 steps perfectly all of the time. There is going to be some here that are slacking more than others, some that I'm not doing at all, like 10 and 11, but I'll pay a price for that. And I have actually recently been in bondage of self and been suffering, which is why I'm reaching out for a new sponsor. Yeah, so in all honesty, at the moment, it's not looking good in answer to your question, but it's going to improve. It has to, because I'll pay for that if I don't do it. Yeah, so a question from Josh about a turning point where I experienced attitude changes. Yeah, so the attitude change it talks about in the Roman numeral pages, it also talks about them on page 27 of the big books. These are complete attitude changes that are essential to recovery. A change from being selfish to selfless is one of them. A change from being very useless to being useful. Complete turnarounds of my attitudes in the way that it talks about in the big book as emotional displacements and rearrangements. So there's quite a big overhaul that has to happen within me. I haven't got to just, change the time I get up in the morning or do this. It's significant changes that have to happen. It's a shift that has to happen within you. And now I need help, and I need powerful help in order to do that. I wasn't capable of doing that on my own. And the turning point for me on those was really probably steps 3 and 4. They were the turning point in terms of those attitude changes, because that's where I saw the truth. That's where I turned to a higher power and started to see my truth and started to forgive people and started to put things right in terms of where I'd made mistakes. That was the turning point for me in terms of my attitude changes, because I'm now looking at how I can contribute to life, instead of before all I wanted to do was take from you and take from life and see what life could do for me. Huge attitude changes need to happen in order for you to turn that around. So daily routine to constantly grow in love and understanding. It's thinking of others. It's doing the step 3 prayer. It's getting out of bondage of self daily, because when I'm in bondage of self, all I'm thinking about is me, okay? And that's not very full of love, and understanding of others. So I need to get out of self. I need to do all of the things that it suggests in the program in order to do that. And that is growing in that. And the understanding part, understanding is twofold, really. There's understanding in terms of my higher power. That grows, as I've said, it's difficult to understand, but I am gaining a better understanding as I go through this. In fact, my conception of God, which it talks about in page 3, has evolved and changed since I first did it. And the second part of understanding is like in the St. Francis's prayer, instead of trying to be understood, because all my life I wanted to be understood, first and foremost is to try and understand others. Why are they how they are? And this changes my reaction pattern, and my attitude changes, because if somebody did something that wasn't very nice, I would take that very personally. Why are they doing that? Is it because I'm not a very good person? They don't like me, or whatever it is. Now I turn that around and say, what is it about them? Why is it that they are behaving that way? Which is a change of attitude and a change of understanding. Thank you, Josh.
Oh, wonderful. I guess I'm going to close out with one final question, and then I'm going to ask you to pray us out. James, what do you want to say to the newcomer today? What do you want to say to the man or woman who is still suffering?
There is a way out. There's a way out of this. I got out of it. I was in a terrible, terrible place, and I didn't think there was a way out. Other than the ultimate decision to end my life. I was wrong. There is absolutely a way out, and I am one of millions of people that have followed this path. It's one solution to the same problem. We share a common problem of the disease of alcoholism addiction. I want to say to you that what you're suffering from is an illness. So if you're suffering from something that's an illness, then you're sick. You need to get well again. You need to look at what is it that's going to make me better, what's going to restore me to health. And the 12 steps absolutely achieves that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, James. Thank you for sharing your powerful story of recovery. Please go ahead and put your number. So if people are looking for support, if people are looking for a sponsor, they can reach out to you. You can either help them or refer them to your sponsees or your fellows. They may want to ask you about the share, so go ahead and put your number in the chat. And with that, I'm going to say a tremendous thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for your recovery and all that you do. And please go ahead and pray us.
Okay, thanks again for this opportunity today. And I've chosen the 3rd step prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen.